Welcome to the Atheist in Recovery podcast, where we talk about finding hope in recovery. And now your host, Dr. Adina Silvestri.
Hello, guys, and welcome to episode 11 of the Atheists in Recovery podcast. Today's episode is different from previous podcasts in that we look at an alternative therapy, floatation therapy, and how it can be utilized in your recovery plan. And I'll let you know that I tested the floatation chamber and wow, it was an experience, and I talk a little bit more about that in the episode. We also talk about Dr. David Berv and his method for using internal martial arts for helping with a pain in his side that no medical doctor could figure out. We go back to 1996 when Oxycontin was introduced into the market, and that was the rise of the fifth vital sign, which was pain. And so how that impacted our society, I think you know the outcome of that story. And we also, among other things, look at the movie Stranger Things, or the show Stranger Things, and its connection to floatation. All right, on to my guest. Dr. David Berv founded and has clinically directed the most iconic and well-awarded interdisciplinary healing arts center in Richmond's history. And his 30-year involvement in the healing arts have been punctuated by frequent features in magazines and radio. His chiropractic, acupuncture, and massage therapy practice was largely influenced by his years living and studying amongst the integrative medical models of the Pacific Northwest, while getting his doctorate degree in the early 90s. In 1997, Dr. Berv brought a unique alternative medical approach to Richmond with Back in Action Health Resource Center. Dr. Berv developed a reputation for good outcomes with difficult musculoskeletal cases. He served on hospital panels, has been the team chiropractor for multiple professional sports teams, and has treated high-level athletes in almost every sport. In 2001, Dr. Berv patented a national golf performance teaching and training program, InterSwing. With this program, he worked closely with hundreds of teaching and touring PGA, LPGA golf professionals. Over the years, Dr. Berv and his clinic have been voted best in Richmond many times in multiple categories. In 2015 alone, Dr. Berv received awards for Best Doctor, Best Chiropractor, and Best Bedside Manner. Also in 2015, his clinic won awards for Best Alternative Health Service and Best Massage Therapy, as well as Best Chiropractic Center. Dr. Berv suffered a career-modifying back injury at the height of his career several years ago, which involved multiple surgical indicated disc herniations. He chose not to get surgery, but instead to reduce his workload and to seek alternative treatments. One of these treatments was the use of floatation therapy. This wealth of knowledge and experience, coupled with the deep concern for physical and mental health of the greater Richmond community, has provided a stepping stone for the development of the float zone. Okay, here we go. Dr. Berv, welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I thought we could start this conversation by inquiring about your spiritual background from childhood, and then we will definitely get to your floatation therapy.
Sure. I did have an interesting spiritual upbringing, kind of a dichotomy between mother and father, but mostly mother was into crystals and mandala healing and color therapy and energy healing and channeling. And so she introduced me at a very young age to a lot of, I'll call them spiritual and alternative type therapies. And it was very influential in my formative years, considering that my religious background was somewhat muddled and somewhat disruptive. So my father, on the other hand, was not really a spiritual person. I grew up in a Reformed Jewish family, and we every time that a high holy day would come up and we would go to synagogue, there would be an argument that would ensue, stimulated by my father, and it became a very uncomfortable and unpleasant kind of experience every time some high holy day came up and we would have to go celebrate in some way. So I had a very ambivalent kind of feeling towards organized religion growing up, and that led me even more towards a more spiritual path, so to speak. And so, yeah, that was a very strong influence from my mom growing up, and then that led to some career choices as a result of that, which I can go into.
Yes, please do.
So yeah, I guess this would be an appropriate place to say it, that I had a substance abuse disorder at a very young age as well. And so I started smoking pot at a very young age, and my parents sent me to a all-boys Catholic high school because that was the only choice in my area of southern coastal Maine, the only other, school other than the public school that existed there. So here I was the only Jewish boy at this Catholic high school, and I actually liked the high school that I went to, and that then made my choice to go to college. I wouldn't say that much easier for me because I didn't want to go to college, but I ended up choosing Boston College, a Jesuit school to go to.
Good school. And
I realized in my very first semester that I hated it there. And, but I was told, by my father to finish what you started. And so I didn't really have a choice, even though I had expressed the desire to want to go someplace else. And so I sought things outside of school. I sought indirectly through going to the New England School of Acupuncture for a pain in my side that no medical doctor could figure out in my first semester of college. And after several treatments of acupuncture, the acupuncturist said, you need to learn what we're doing with needles on your own by learning some type of internal martial art like Tai Chi or Qigong. And so that led me to the pursuit of Tai Chi at 18 years old. And I became very proficient at it, and I was consumed by it. And I studied internal martial arts to where I could not only be proficient in the form, but internal martial arts, you also learn how to cultivate energy, inside yourself and learn how to heal others. And I, at the same time, sought out other forms of alternative therapy at that time called polarity therapy. And polarity therapy is a form of vibrational medicine, it's called, where you learn how to focus your energy into other people and help other people to heal. And so this is at 18, 19 years old. I was already kind of certified in healing art, so to speak, but was very far away from the academic side of it, from school. And in dealing with people as a healer at a very young age, you pick up on a lot of subtleties about spirituality and about where people are stuck and where people are frustrated and where people aren't speaking up for themselves or being true to themselves. And so that was throughout my whole college career. I was, more interested in spiritual pursuits, so to speak, until I got in a very bad car accident shortly after graduation. And my brother said to me, have you been to a chiropractor for your neck pain? And I said, what's a chiropractor? And so I ended up going to this chiropractor who I didn't necessarily like his business ethics and practices, but I really liked what he did for me using his hands. And I thought, wow, this is not knowing what I wanted to do here. I had a degree now in philosophy and comparative religion, and didn't know what to do with myself, after 4 years of university. So that gave me vision, at the time when I got in this accident, and I was helped by this chiropractor. And I said, that's what I want to do, is to go to chiropractic school. And so without a plan B, I moved to Portland, Oregon to pursue chiropractic school without having been accepted. And of course, the prerequisites, all the science courses that were required, I had taken for non-science majors. So I had to go back to school for a couple more years in Portland before actually being accepted to school. And it was during that time, actually, that I developed what was called at the time chronic fatigue syndrome. And it was due to stress. It was due to the stress that I was under there. And it will make sense later on in the discussion what this really was at the time, because it wasn't necessarily chronic fatigue, it was something else. But that led me down other spiritual paths and other spiritual journeys to help me to recover and then to go to school. So that's a little bit about my spiritual background, so to speak, growing up, and then that kind of starts a whole new chapter at the chiropractic era.
Right. So you're not only a chiropractor, you are also an acupuncturist. Is that correct?
Yep. So I have a diploma in acupuncture, and so I'm not currently practicing. And again, there's a reason why I've recently retired from chiropractic and acupuncture, but practiced chiropractic, acupuncture, and Asian healing arts, things like cupping therapy, for instance. But some other pretty westernized and not very common techniques that I practiced, that I learned through the American Academy of Medical Acupuncture, like scalp acupuncture and ear acupuncture, and the types of acupuncture that you don't necessarily see when you walk into a routine acupuncturist.
I love acupuncture.
But I love acupuncture too, but I was dealing with some very complex scenarios at the time, doing the combination of chiropractic and acupuncture. I was seeing people and seeing conditions that I wouldn't normally have seen just as a straight on chiropractor. And that gave me new challenges, and that excited me, having at the time in my practice being bored basically when I went back to school for acupuncture.
Okay. So let's switch gears and talk about your flotation center. So you have a flotation center in Richmond, Virginia. What led to you making this career shift? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so good segue to what I was talking about before. So I started practice. I moved here from Portland, Oregon. I graduated in 1996, the same year that Oxycontin was released to the market. And then I moved to Portland, and then I moved from Portland here to Richmond. And I tell people that I moved from the future, because it was quite different here, moving from a very interdisciplinary, cooperative, East-West type environment to a very westernized, medical-based society here. Mm-hmm. And to anyone that knows anything about here we are on the podcast specifically for addiction, et cetera. At that time in 1996, pain was a fifth vital sign. And so, in addition to blood pressure and pulse and respiration and temperature, that doctors were looking at pain as the fifth vital sign, and like, oh, you have more pain, you need more pills. And I was watching this kind of unfold in front of my very own eyes. And then ironically, I started getting chronic back pain. I had a very physical practice. I chiropractic as it is a very hands-on practice, but I was doing a lot of lifting, bending, and twisting, and had herniated a couple discs, and I was in chronic pain for a good part of my career. And constantly was I looking for other things to not only help myself, but to help other people. And I'm going to fast forward to, this is like 2011, 2012. And I was actually doing everything short of surgery for my back.
Wow.
I really didn't want to get surgery. I had seen too many failed back surgeries in my career, and I didn't want to be one of those people. And so I knew a lot of the good tools and a lot of the good techniques, and I was doing everything, including even, trying different medications. I never did opioid medications, but many medications. And then I had nerves burned out in my back, and I was to the point where I was like just beside myself. And it was, I thought I was having another episode in 2013, and it ended up being a multiple sclerosis episode, actually. So I was stricken with multiple sclerosis at the end of 2013, and that is what changed my life and changed my direction, because it was shortly after that initial episode that I was visiting my brother in early 2014. And he said, "David, you're a mess. I need to take you for a float." And I said, "What's a float?" And he brings me to this center, and I got out of this fiberglass tank with 10 inches of skin temperature water in it with 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt, and I was floating effortlessly like a cork for an hour. And I got out of there, and I felt incredible. I went in there, and I was hunched over in pain. I just had brain fog and was just so irritable and anxious. And I got out, and I felt amazing. And I said, I need to get one of these for my home. So at the time, there really was not a lot for the home, and there still really is limited selection. But there was a Kickstarter campaign, and I ended up buying what was called a float tent. And so it looked like a pup tent, that holds 175 gallons of water and the same amount of 1,000 pounds of salt. And there's a filter system in there, and I converted my home office into a float center, a personal float center, and I floated regularly for over a year. I wouldn't say daily, but almost daily. And it was during that time, I had such contemplative and quiet meditative experiences in there that it was just made it so profoundly obvious to me that I needed to change what I was doing in my life to strike a better work-play stress balance. And that's when I decided that I wanted to open up a float center and phase out of my chiropractic practice at the time. Was getting close to 20 years old. And so it took me another couple of years to phase out of that while I was building out the center, and then started the float zone.
Yeah. Yes. So I have tried the flotation arena, and I like it. It's for some people, I think they think it's it's scary, and what if you get locked in, and some of the things that I hear. I don't know if you've also heard those things, but you really are just weightless. It's such an experience. So.
Oh, yeah, I remember, when I first opened up here, of course I had to deal with the county and permitting and everything. And I'm convinced that they thought I was bringing in spaceships. That I was bringing in, some kind of like, there was valid concern, or is this going to be safe for people? So I had to prove the safety, from a UL listed kind of perspective. No one's going to get electrocuted in there. No one's going to get injured in there. But the two biggest objections I guess, our claustrophobia and sanitation. You know, is it clean? And I'm not going to close that lid. You know, is this going to be like an MRI machine? And I think, you know, the bottom line is that you customize it to your comfort level, right? So you can listen to music, you can have the lights on, you can leave the lid open. But it is probably the most beneficial for you and the most comfortable temperature-wise and everything, keeping the lid closed. I mean, lights on, lights off is your preference. Music on, music off is your preference. But and then from a sanitation standpoint, it's almost overkill. First of all, there's 1,000 pounds of magnesium sulfate salt in there that nothing's going to grow in, and then it's filtered after every float through ozone, through UV, through, you know, a bag cartridge filter. But yeah, so those are the concerns. But I think that, you know, especially with a lot of the television shows and things like Stranger Things, people have actually asked, you know, am I going to go upside down? You know, am I going to go into that other world? Am I going to go someplace? Yeah. Am I going to come back? What happens if I fall asleep? Am I going to wake up days later and people are going to find me in here? Or, so it's funny because how your imagination can slip away from you. And, you know, it is quite interesting as you know, in there, even though it's sensory deprivation, so to speak, because as a result of the water being the same temperature as your skin, you can't tell where the skin ends and the water begins. You literally feel like you're in a cloud, and you know, so you've removed gravity, and you know, when you don't have these other senses, you tend to pay more attention to your internal senses, and so you're aware of your heartbeat and your breathing and your digestive noises and your thoughts. And so sometimes, you know, your thoughts can go wild, like the girl that was convinced that she was going to get bitten by a shark while floating in there because she's afraid of swimming and afraid of the ocean. She thought, you know, or there's many people where that feel like, oh, I've never been able to float. You know, am I going to be able to float or am I going to sink? And yes, you will float. You will not sink.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you will not sink. I can attest to that. Well, I think we should switch gears now and talk about your case study. You did a case study evaluating float therapy for opioid recovery. Tell us a little bit about that. Tell us about the participants and
Yeah. So let me just backtrack a little bit. So that transition from clinical practice to being the chief experience officer, I call myself, of the float zone, I still had this desire to do something clinical. And in the world of floating, there's not a lot of research that's been done in floating because it's a relatively new arena. And so there's also not a lot of doctors, not a lot of clinicians that own float centers. And so I saw this as an opportunity to do some case studies on floating and particular topics. And so when people were finished floating, I would go in and talk to them. Hey, why did you float today? Why did you float today? And so there was a myriad of different reasons why people would come in, from traumatic brain injury to chronic pain to different types of diseases, whether it be multiple sclerosis or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or just chronic pain. And so I started doing these studies. I started off with traumatic brain injury, and that led me to chronic headaches and chronic neck pain, chronic back pain, where I would get a certain participating audience that I would screen out, choose maybe 10 or 12 people to participate in the study, and have them float for a particular time frame, send them daily surveys to fill out, and then get some data from that after a period of time. It was not long after these studies that I chose to do a recovery and floating study, in part because we had a couple, and we currently have some employees that are in recovery. And moreover, in my internship in chiropractic college, I did my internship at a recovery center. And at a homeless shelter. And so it's always been something close to my heart too. And so knowing the benefits of floating on so many different levels, from anxiety to sleep, to stress, to pain management, I thought this would be the perfect study. So I have some contacts at the McShin organization, and through them and through some contacts at Float Zone, through employees there, I was able to find 6 people to participate in an 8-week study where participants floated once weekly for 8 weeks. And there was really no other expectations of them other than, the criteria where they were all actually of various times in recovery. So some was as little as 6 months, and there was one person that was 10 years in, and there was one that was like six years, one that was 4 years, one that was 2 years, one that was 1 year. So kind of a mix of that. And that was, this was my first one, so I'll know how to do different ones in the future as far as the selection process. But so the results of that after 8 weeks were pretty remarkable. And there was not one person that had any negative effects from it, and there were really no side effects per se, and they were all positive things that came out of it. And I think it really impressed upon everyone in recovery that clean time does not necessarily equal recovery. And maybe I'm not saying that right, but what I'm getting at is more, there's a self-care aspect of recovery that was really apparent about, yes, I do need to get better sleep. Yes, wow, I do need to get a better handle on my stress and anxiety. Yes, I do need help with my activities of daily living, or
you need to learn new skills.
Over my learning new skills, but often learning new skills requires a different perspective, a resetting, and a deep reflection without all the hustle and bustle of the day and of the commitments and of the mind chatter that goes on, without the purposeful pause that people took during that 1 hour of floating once a week. Was probably the most impressive thing that I noticed. It was incredible, the anxiety and the stress levels that were decreased through that 8-week process. And it really seemed like everyone's level of disability, everyone's level of pain, everyone's level of stress decreased, and everyone's level of serenity increased, and everyone kind of slowed down a little bit and was able to get perspective on their life during that time, and be able to implement things that they had either been working on or new insights that they had as a result.
And how about the post-study participants? How did they fare after the study ended? What did you find?
I found that a month later is when I sent out another survey, that most of the benefits that were gained during the 8 weeks were retained a month later. So I didn't know what to expect, because they varied from group to group. Sometimes when I did pain studies, exclusively pain studies, that the pain reduction didn't necessarily last. But what I found unequivocally a month later, without anyone floating, was that the emotional benefits lasted significantly. And that really impressed me.
So I'm going to switch gears for a minute and ask you a final question. If you had a time machine and you could travel into the future, what would you see? What would recovery look like in the distant future, based on what you know?
Based on what I know, I think it would involve a combination of counseling, I think things like floating, along with something like acupuncture, massage, but engaging in other, I'm trying to think of like, I guess of getting too specific as far as, things like yoga too. But I think, I personally, I'm a proponent of medication assisted treatment after, even though I just understand how hard it is to change that addiction without some kind of assistance. And so I think there needs to be some kind of acceptance or some kind of accepted usage of medication assisted treatment, along with a coordinated effort of talk therapy, counseling, along with something like a floating, meditation, mindfulness, some mindfulness-based stress reduction kind of input to the process. I'm sorry that I wasn't very clear on that last part, but yeah, I think definitely a combination, because no one thing itself, I think, can do it all.
Good. Well, that sounds like a pretty good place to end. I want to thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Glad to be here. Appreciate it.
What are some of the best ways to reach you and find the Float Zone?
You can reach me in my personal email, david@myfloatzone.com.
Okay, great. Thank you again. Thank you for listening to the Atheists in Recovery podcast. For more great info and to stay up to date, head over to atheistsandrecovery.com.